The story of Diane and Bernard sounds like a cliché 7-year-itch scenario. A CEO husband who considers himself misunderstood and underappreciated, a CFO wife who is criticized for being like a mother, and a young, lively intern who awakens the man's so-called artistic soul. The plot is quite cliché, isn't it? But the most ironic part of this story lies in a misunderstanding many men think they can fly because they have wings. In reality, it is because someone is silently holding them up against gravity. The corridor of the luxury hotel in downtown Chicago was lined with thick, plush carpet that swallowed the sound of Diane's heels. She carried a garment bag over one arm and a small, hopeful smile on her lips. It was their 10th anniversary since they had started dating in high school, and the 6th since they had signed the marriage license at City Hall. Bernard had been stuck on a business trip. Or so he said, but Diane, the woman who managed the intricate financial veins of their tech consulting firm, knew his schedule better than he did. She knew the meetings had ended at 3. She had flown in to surprise him, to maybe rekindle the spark that had felt dim and flickering for the better part of a year. She reached the suite number, 1408. Her hand raised to knock, but the sound of laughter from inside froze her knuckles midair. It wasn't a woman's laugh. That would have been a cliché. She could almost process. It was Bernard's laugh, deep and unguarded, the kind she hadn't heard directed at her in months. Then came the voice of his college friend and business partner, Mark. Come on, man, you have to call her. It is the big one Izzy ignore. If you ignore Diane tonight, you are asking for World War I too. Diane stood still, her breath catching in her throat. She waited for Bernard to defend her, to say he had a gift planned, or that he missed her. I can't deal with it right now. Bernard's voice drifted through the wood, sounding exhausted, bordering on resentful. She is just so heavy lately. Everything is about the budget, or Mia's schedule, or the house maintenance. I look at her, and I just see a manager, not a wife. She has turned into my mother, Mark. It is suffocating. She is the CFO, Bernard. Managing is her job, and she helped build the company, Mark countered. Though his tone was weak, that was before, Bernard scoffed, the sound of ice clinking against glass following. She has lost her edge. She is boring. You know what Haley said to me yesterday? She said, I have the soul of an artist trapped in a CEO's body. She sees me, Diane just sees a paycheck and a chore list. Haley makes me feel alive again, like I matter for more than just what I can provide. The garment bag slipped from Diane's numb fingers, sliding silently to the floor. Inside was the cream-colored silk negligee she'd bought for tonight. Expensive, a splurge that had felt daring when she'd hidden it from their shared credit card statement. She'd imagined his face when he saw it, imagined reconnecting the way they used to, skin to skin, heart to heart. Now it felt like evidence of her own foolishness, and the shame burned hotter than the betrayal. The name Haley hit her like a physical blow, the intern. The girl with the bright eyes and the messy workspace who always needed Bernard's mentorship late into the evenings. Diane had signed off on her hiring paperwork 3 months ago. She didn't barge in. She didn't scream. Diane's hand shook as she picked up the garment bag, but her mind, honed by years of balancing impossible equations, clicked into a terrible clarity. The man inside that room, complaining that she was boring, was the same man who, 10 years ago, had trekked 10 miles through a historic blizzard just to bring her fever medicine when they were broke students living in a drafty basement apartment. She remembered his fingers, blue with cold, unwrapping the pharmacy bag as if it were gold. That boy was dead. The man in the suite was a stranger wearing his skin. Diane looked at the door one last time, not with longing, but with the detached scrutiny of someone finally seeing the truth. She turned around and walked back to the elevator. She didn't cry until she was in the cab heading to O'Hare Airport. And even then, it was a silent, efficient weeping. The kind you do when you can't afford to fall apart because there is a 5-year-old waiting at home who still believes her parents are heroes. She wiped her face before she reached the terminal. If Bernard wanted to feel alive again, he could have it. But he seemed to forget that at 21, he had nothing. Every connection, Every connection, every carefully balanced account, it was Diane's work that held it all together. He wanted to be an artist. Fine, she would step back and let him paint his own masterpiece. She just wouldn't be there to clean up the mess. The house in the suburbs was an architectural marvel of glass and steel, kept at a perfect 72 degrees by a smart climate control system. Yet, when Diane unlocked the front door that night, it felt colder than the blizzards of her youth. She checked on 5-year-old Mia, who was sleeping soundly, clutching a stuffed rabbit that Bernard had bought her years ago, back when he still showed up. Diane smoothed the hair back from her daughter's forehead, her heart constricting. This was the collateral damage. This was the cost of Bernard's midlife crisis that arrived a decade early. She didn't sleep. She spent the night in her home office, but not reviewing documents. Not yet. She sat in the dark, letting herself feel the full weight of it. 10 years, a child, a business, a life built brick by brick. And he had called her boring. The word echoed in her skull like a taunt. Maybe she was boring. Maybe managing a household and a company and a marriage left no room for spontaneity. Maybe she had lost herself somewhere between the spreadsheets and the school pickups. But then she thought of Mia, and she thought of the 21-year-old girl who had believed love was enough. That girl had been wrong. Love wasn't enough. Respect was, partnership was, and Bernard had forfeited both. By the time the sun rose, Diane had made her decision. She pulled out the company bylaws, the operational documents, the partnership agreements. If Bernard wanted out of this marriage, she would give him an exit. But it would be on her terms. It was late when he finally came home 2 days later. He tossed his keys on the counter, not noticing, or not caring, that Diane was sitting in the kitchen darkness, nursing a cup of tea. "You were up," he said, startled. He smelled faintly of a perfume that wasn't hers, something sweet and young. "I tried to call you on our anniversary," Diane said, her voice even. Bernard sighed, the same exhausted sound she had heard through the hotel door. "I told you, the signal at the conference center was garbage. Don't start, Diane. I am tired." He turned his back to her, opening the fridge. In the past, this was the moment Diane would have softened. It was their tradition, born from their high school days. Never go to bed angry. One of them would always make hot cocoa or tea, a peace offering to bridge the gap. Diane looked at the kettle. She could turn it on. She could try to fix this. She could tell him she went to Chicago Cry, demand he end things with Haley, and beg him to love her again. But the memory of his voice calling her, suffocating, stopped her hand. She realized with a jolt that she didn't want to fix it. Some things, once broken, weren't meant to be repaired. "I am not starting anything," Diane said, standing up. "I just wanted to make sure you were home safe." Bernard didn't even turn around. "I am home. I am going to sleep in the guest room. I have an early call and I don't want to wake you." It was a lie. He didn't want to look at her. The next morning, the reality of their fractured life bled into the daylight. Mia sat at the breakfast table, swinging her legs, watching her father rush through his coffee while glued to his phone. He was smiling at the screen, a small, secretive smirk that vanished the moment he looked up. "Daddy, are you coming to my ballet recital on Friday?" Mia asked, her voice small. Bernard blinked, looking at his daughter as if she were an interruption. "Friday, honey. Daddy is so busy with the new merger. Mom will be there. Mom is always there. But you promised last time," Mia whispered. "Don't be difficult, Mia," Bernard snapped, his patience thin. He grabbed his briefcase. "I am doing this for us, for this family, so you can have nice things." He left without kissing either of them. Goodbye. The heavy front door slammed shut, shaking the expensive art on the walls. Diane watched Mia's face crumble. She saw the lesson her daughter was learning in real time, that men's attention was a scarce resource you had to beg for, and that being difficult was the worst crime a girl could commit. "He is not doing it for us, baby," Diane said softly, pulling Mia into her lap, burying her face in the child's soft curls. "He is doing what he thinks he needs to do, but that doesn't mean it is right." Mia looked up at her with those wide, trusting eyes. "Did I make Daddy mad?" "No, sweetheart." Diane's voice cracked. "You didn't do anything wrong. Sometimes grown-ups make bad choices, and it has nothing to do with how wonderful you are." That moment was the catalyst. If the hotel corridor was the crack in the glass, seeing her daughter's disappointment was the hammer that shattered it completely. Bernard thought Diane was boring. He thought she was just a manager. He was about to find out exactly how effectively she could manage a crisis. She wasn't going to just leave him, she was going to wait. The company's annual charity gala was in 3 weeks. It was the biggest social event of the season, crucial for their investors. Bernard assumed she would stay home, the dutiful, invisible wife. She would not be staying home. The weeks leading up to the gala were a masterclass in compartmentalization. Diane played the part of the busy, distracted wife to perfection, giving Bernard the wide berth he so clearly craved. She watched him work late, watched the new passcode appear on his phone, and watched the small, telltale signs of a man in the throes of infatuation. The new shirts, the expensive cologne, the sudden interest in indie bands he used to mock. Then came the text from an unknown number. "Seemed we need to talk. Starbucks on 5th, noon." Asterisk Diane knew who it was. She arrived at 11:55, ordered a black coffee, and sat with her back straight, her hands folded to keep them from shaking. At noon exactly, Haley walked in. She was young and pretty, dressed in the careful, casual way of someone trying to look professional on an intern's budget, a blazer that was slightly too big, probably borrowed, over a simple blouse. She looked around, spotted Diane, and hesitated before sitting down. "Thanks for coming, Mrs. Miller," Haley said quietly, not quite meeting Diane's eyes. "I know this is awful timing." Diane took a slow sip of her coffee. "What do you want to talk about, Haley?" "It is about Bernard." Haley twisted her hands in her lap. "I thought you deserved to know the truth. Bernard and I, we didn't plan this. It just happened. He has been so unhappy. And she stopped, swallowing hard. He told me he is filing for divorce. He said you two have been over for a while. I thought you should hear it from me first, not from a lawyer." The audacity was breathtaking, but Diane could see it wasn't malicious. It was naive. This girl actually thought she was doing the right thing. She thought she was the heroine in some romantic story, where the misunderstood man finally finds true love. "Did he tell you we have a 5-year-old daughter?" Diane asked calmly. Haley's face paled. He mentioned her. He said you are a great mom, that you'd be fine." "I see." Diane set down her cup. "Let me tell you something, Haley. Woman to woman, Bernard is very good at making people feel special. 10 years ago, he made me feel like I was the only person in the world who understood him. He trekked through a blizzard to bring me medicine when I was sick. He wrote me poetry. He promised me forever." Haley's eyes widened, uncertainty creeping in. "But here is what he didn't tell you," Diane continued, her voice steady. "I am the one who built the company while he played visionary. I am the one who balanced the books when we were broke. I am the one who stayed up all night with our daughter when she had croup while he was networking at bars. And now that the hard work is done, now that we're successful, he is bored. He wants to feel young again. And you," Diane's gaze was not unkind, but it was unflinching. "You are convenient." "That is not true," Haley whispered. But her voice wavered. "Maybe it is not. Maybe you two will be very happy." Diane stood up, picking up her purse. "But here is a piece of advice. When the excitement wears off, when you are the one managing the bills and the schedules and the reality of life, ask yourself, will he still think you are special? Or will there be another intern, another woman who makes him feel alive?" She left Haley sitting there, the certainty draining from her face. Diane walked out into the crisp city air. Her hands were shaking again, but not from fear, from anger, from grief, from the terrible clarity that she had wasted 10 years on a man who saw her as a supporting character in his story. She didn't go home to cry. She went straight to her lawyer's office. The gala wasn't just a party anymore. It was a statement. The night of the charity gala, the ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton, was a sea of black tuxedos and polite conversation. Bernard stood near the bar, looking dashing and undeniably anxious. He kept checking his watch. Haley wasn't there. Interns weren't invited to the VIP hour. But he was clearly wishing he was elsewhere. He had told Diane not to bother coming. "It is just boring networking. I stay home with Mia. You hate these things anyway." He was in the middle of laughing at a joke made by Mr. Henderson, their largest angel investor, when the room's ambient chatter dipped, then hushed. Bernard turned. At the top of the grand staircase stood Diane. She wasn't wearing the sensible navy pantsuit or the modest gray dress he was used to. She was wearing a floor-length gown of deep, blood-red silk that clung to her figure like liquid fire. Her hair, usually pulled back in a severe bun, cascaded in loose waves over one shoulder. She wore no jewelry except for a pair of diamond drop earrings, her grandmother's, the ones she'd been saving for a special occasion, that caught the light with every movement. She looked regal. She looked powerful. She looked like a woman who had finally stopped apologizing for taking up space. "Is that your wife?" Mr. Henderson asked, his eyebrows raising. Bernard couldn't speak. He stared as Diane descended the stairs, not with hesitant steps, but with the confident stride of a woman who knew exactly what she was worth. She didn't look at him. She walked straight to a group of board members who were currently debating the fiscal projections for the next quarter. Bernard watched, paralyzed, as she effortlessly joined the conversation. He saw the board members nod, saw them lean in as she spoke, saw them laugh at something she said. He saw Mr. Henderson excuse himself and beeline for her, bypassing Bernard entirely. Diane. "I was just telling Bernard we never see you at these things," Henderson boomed, taking her hand with genuine warmth. "You know how it is, Arthur," Diane smiled, a dazzling, charming expression Bernard hadn't seen in years, or maybe had never bothered to notice. Someone has to keep the operations running while the vision gets all the glory. But I thought tonight required a personal touch. I read your email about the acquisition strategy. Fascinating approach. You read that? Henderson looked impressed. Bernard said it was too dense, too much in the weeds. I love the weeds, Arthur. That is where the real work happens, Diane said smoothly, her eyes finally flickering to Bernard, cool and unreadable. Details matter. That is where you find out if a foundation is solid or if it is all just pretty facade. For the next 2 hours, Bernard was a ghost at his own event. He watched his boring wife work the room with a charisma he had convinced himself she'd lost, or perhaps had never wanted to see. He realized with a sinking dread that the people in this room didn't respect him the way they respected her. They tolerated his big ideas because she made them viable. He was the face, but she was the foundation. And foundations, he was learning, could walk away, driven by a mix of humiliation and a twisted, reignited desire. He cornered her near the terrace doors. "What are you doing?" he hissed, grabbing her elbow. "You said you were staying home." "I changed my mind," Diane said, pulling her arm away with a firmness that surprised him. Her skin was cool to the touch. "You are making a scene. That dress, it is too much. People are talking. Let them talk." "Why are you doing this?" Bernard's voice cracked, and for a moment, he looked like the boy she'd loved. "Are you trying to embarrass me?" Diane felt something twist in her chest. Not love, not anymore. But the ghost of it, the memory of who they'd been before, ambition and resentment had poisoned everything. "Not everything is about you, Bernard," she said quietly, and the sadness in her voice was real. "I am here because I built this company too. I am here because I deserve to be seen. For 10 years, I made myself smaller so you could feel bigger. I am done shrinking. Diane, go home, Bernard, or go to Haley. I really don't care anymore." She stepped closer, and he could smell the jasmine perfume she used to wear when they were dating. The scent he'd forgotten he loved. "But don't stand here and pretend you are the king of this castle. We both know who built the walls." She walked away, leaving him standing alone on the edge of the dance floor. He looked down at his hand where a glass of scotch trembled. For the first time in months, he wasn't thinking about Haley's youth or the way she made him feel. He was terrified. He realized he had absolutely no idea who his wife was. And worse, he suspected he was about to find out the hard way. Monday morning arrived with the gray, unrelenting drizzle typical of the city's autumn. The office was quiet, the hum of servers the only sound in the executive wing. Diane sat in the conference room, a stack of documents neatly aligned before her. Across the table sat Bernard, looking disheveled and hungover, and their company lawyer, James, who refused to make eye contact with him. "This is ridiculous," Bernard muttered, rubbing his temples. "Divorce, really, Diane? Over a rough patch. We can go to counseling. I can cut back on hours. I'll end things with Haley if that is what you want." "It is not about Haley," Diane said, and she meant it. "It is about respect. It is about partnership, and we don't have that anymore. Maybe we never did." She slid a thick binder across the mahogany table. "I've drafted a settlement. It is fair." Bernard flipped it open, scanning the pages with glazed eyes. He saw the numbers, a lump sum payout that looked substantial enough to buy a penthouse, a sports car, maybe start a small venture. It dazzled him. "You are buying me out?" he asked, a smirk touching his lips despite himself. "So you want the company? Fine. It has been a headache anyway. I can finally focus on my own projects, maybe that gallery idea or consulting work." He stopped, realizing how that sounded. He glanced at Diane, expecting pain or anger. He found only a tired resignation. "Sign here, here, and initial here," James said, his voice carefully neutral. "Wait," Bernard paused, pen hovering. "What about the voting shares and the intellectual property rights?" "The cash offer is contingent on a full transfer of Class A shares," Diane explained, her tone professional, almost gentle. "You keep the cash, the car, and your freedom. I keep the company, the house, and primary custody of Mia. You get visitation every other weekend, supervised for the first 6 months." "Supervised? That is insulting. I am her father." "You missed her recital, Bernard. You haven't been home for dinner in 3 months." Diane's voice didn't rise, but there was steel underneath. "You were starting a new chapter of your life. Do you really want to be juggling custody schedules and board meetings? Or do you want the freedom to figure out who you are without all these responsibilities you've been calling suffocating?" The words hit their mark. Bernard looked at the check amount again. It was freedom. It was an escape from the boring life he'd been complaining about. It was a chance to be young and unencumbered, to chase the dreams he'd been putting off. He didn't read the fine print on page 42, the clause about non-compete agreements that barred him from the tech sector for 5 years in the region. He didn't read the clause about the morality provision that could claw back funds if he disparaged the company publicly. He never read the details. That had always been Diane's job, he signed, with a flourish, like he was signing autographs. "Done," he said, dropping the pen with a sense of relief. "You always wanted to run everything anyway, Diane. Have fun with it." He stood up, feeling lighter, almost triumphant. He walked out of the room without looking back, already pulling out his phone. Diane watched the door close. She let out a breath she felt she'd been holding for a decade. She looked at James. "Did he read the non-compete?" James asked quietly. "No," Diane replied. "He never does." She picked up the signed papers. She hadn't just secured a company. She had secured her daughter's future. Bernard had walked away with a pile of cash that would last him maybe 3 years with his spending habits and his new lifestyle. She had kept the engine that generated wealth, the relationships that mattered, the stability that Mia needed. He had chosen the golden egg. She had kept the goose. But as she sat there in the empty conference room, Diane didn't feel victorious. She felt hollow. She had won, but what had she won? A company, yes, security, yes, but also single parenthood, late nights alone, the weight of every decision on her shoulders. She allowed herself one moment of grief, one moment to mourn the boy who had walked through a blizzard for her, the future they'd imagined, the family they'd almost been. Then she stood up, smoothed her skirt, and walked back to her office. There was work to do. The first month after the divorce finalized, Diane cried every night after Mia went to bed. Not for Bernard, she was done mourning him, but for the version of herself who had believed love and competence could coexist in a marriage. She'd spent 10 years making him look good, covering his mistakes, smoothing over his rough edges. She'd been the invisible scaffolding holding up his confidence. Now she had to learn something harder, how to believe she was enough on her own without anyone to prop up, without anyone to need her. The house felt too big and too quiet. She'd sold the glass and steel showpiece in the suburbs, too many memories, too much empty space, and bought a smaller brownstone closer to Mia's school. It had a fireplace that actually worked, creaky stairs that announced every footstep, and a kitchen window that looked out onto a garden she was learning to tend. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers. She started therapy, not couples counseling, not crisis management, but real, deep work on herself. She talked about her childhood, about her mother who had stayed in a loveless marriage for the kids, about the ways she'd learned to make herself useful instead of asking to be loved. "You turned yourself into a service," her therapist said one afternoon. "You thought if you were indispensable, you'd be irreplaceable, but people don't cherish what they take for granted." Deanne cried in that session, ugly, gasping sobs that she'd been holding back for years. She also started saying no to the PTA president, who assumed she'd chair every committee, no to the board member who called her at 10 p.m. with quick questions, no to the voice in her head that said she had to be perfect to be worthy. She took Mia to the park on Saturday mornings instead of catching up on emails. She signed up for a pottery class and made lopsided bowls that Mia declared were perfect for cereal. She let herself be mediocre at something, and it felt like freedom. And slowly, painfully, she started to feel like a person again instead of a function. 6 months later, the snow was falling again, thick and silent, blanketing the city in white, inside the warm, well-lit living room of the brownstone. Diane sat reading a book, an actual novel, not a business biography, while Mia built a Lego castle on the rug, humming to herself. The doorbell rang. Not the polite chime of a guest, but a frantic, repeated buzzing. Diane checked the security camera on her phone. It was Bernard. He looked thinner, his coat unbuttoned despite the freezing cold, his face haggard. He looked like the boy she had loved, but hollowed out by desperation. She walked to the door but didn't open it. She spoke through the intercom. "Bernard, you need to leave." "Deanne, please let me in. The bank froze my accounts." Haley left. She took everything. She said I was a loser because I can't start a new firm. You knew about the non-compete." His voice was raw, cracking with panic and something that might have been tears. "I miss you. I miss Mia. I made a mistake. It was just a stupid midlife crisis. Everyone has them. We can fix this. Please just open the door. It is freezing out here." Deanne leaned her forehead against the cool wood of the door. She remembered the blizzard 10 years ago. She remembered the heat of his hand, the way he'd looked at her, like she was the only thing that mattered. She remembered the love, but she also remembered the hotel corridor. She is boring. She is suffocating. Asterisk, she remembered Mia's face when he'd called her difficult for wanting her father at her recital. She remembered the years of making herself smaller, quieter, more convenient. "I can't help you, Bernard," she said softly, and her voice was sad but firm. "I have rights. I am her father. You can't keep me from my daughter." "You signed away primary custody for a payout," Diane reminded him, and there was no triumph in her voice. "Only exhaustion, and you have a restraining order for showing up here unannounced. If you don't leave, the security patrol will be here in 3 minutes. They're already notified." "You heartless." "I am not heartless." Diane cut him off, her voice steady. "I am just done setting myself on fire to keep you warm. You made your choices. Bernard, now you have to live with them, just like I am living with mine." She turned off the intercom. She watched on the screen as the private security vehicle pulled up, lights flashing silently in the snow. 2 large men stepped out. They didn't hurt him, they just escorted him away, off her property, out of her life. Diane turned back to the room. Her hands were shaking. Mia looked up from her Legos, her small face worried. "Who was that, Mommy?" Deanne paused. She could lie. It would be easier, but Mia deserved better than the lessons Bernard had taught. That women should be small, that anger should be swallowed, that love meant accepting crumbs. "That was your father. Sweetheart, he made some choices that hurt us, and now he is dealing with the consequences. Sometimes people we love let us down." Mia considered this, her face serious in the way only a 5-year-old's can be. "Like when Emma took my crayons and the teacher made her sit in time out?" "Sort of like that," Diane said, smiling, despite the ache in her chest. She pulled Mia close, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. "But you know what? We're going to be okay, better than okay, because we have each other, Mia asked. Because we have each other, Diane confirmed. And because we're strong. You know how you built that tower. You made the foundation really solid, so it wouldn't fall down. That is what we're doing, building something strong. Mia nodded, satisfied, and returned to her Legos. Diane watched her for a moment. This small person who was learning to build her own foundations, who would grow up knowing that love shouldn't cost you yourself. She looked out the window at the falling snow. The past wasn't buried. It would always be part of her story, the scar tissue that proved she'd survived. But she was writing new chapters now, ones where she wasn't the supporting character in someone else's narrative. She was alone, yes, but she wasn't empty. She wasn't half of something broken. She was whole unto herself, a mother, a businesswoman, a woman learning to take up space without apologizing. The snow kept falling, covering the old footprints, making everything clean and new. And in the warm light of her own home, surrounded by lopsided pottery and Lego castles, and the quiet hum of a life she'd built with her own hands, Diane Miller felt something she hadn't felt in years: peace. Ladies, remember this. If a man complains that you are too practical or too boring, don't rush to question your own lack of romance, and certainly don't try to win him back by buying sexy silk lingerie. Instead, examine the company's ownership structure, confirm the ownership of assets, and read the fine print in those contracts. In this world, when a woman holds all the cards, she no longer needs to please anyone. What is considered boring is actually the highest form of unshakable. This is Madam Reed. Some doors, once closed, should never be opened again, even if it is freezing outside. See you next time.